Welcome back to the Money Pig Podcast, brought to you by Goodwin Investment Advisory, where our mission is to lead people to financial peace, independence, and generosity. I am your host, Reid Trego, and today on the show, we are joined by our founder, Tim Goodwin, for a discussion, well, it's just going to be deep thoughts.
Deep thoughts.
On end-of-year planning.
Okay.
Deep end-of-year thoughts.
Maybe not so deep.
With Tim Goodwin.
Is this a nod to the SNL skits?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who did those?
Well, they were Jack Handy.
Handy, Deep Thoughts.
He's not a real person. It was a character.
I don't know if we'll be that fun or funny, but they're going to be awesome.
Okay.
These deep thoughts are fantastic. Just get ready.
Awesome.
Get out your pen and paper.
Yeah, and anybody who wants more of these deep thoughts and is interested can text blog to 66866 to get on our email list to receive our blog.
Consistent deep thoughts coming to you over and over again.
Like twice a month.
Yeah.
Hundreds.
We've been doing that for years. It's good stuff. There's some good stuff on that blog.
Yeah, it's
I love
awesome.
it.
So how have you been?
I'm doing great, man.
Good.
Super excited. My wife and I just got back from a little trip this past weekend. Stock market's doing good. It's the holidays, so it's good. How are you doing?
Super.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Good.
doing really good. And what is the S&P? It's up?
So I looked at it. So it's the last day of November. So it'd be really cool to see like tomorrow, year to date through the end of November. But as of the close yesterday, S&P 500 total return, guys, drum roll, please.
Okay.
Joy to the world. It's up 20.3%. Yes. Nice. I love it. Yeah, it's been a volatile year for sure, but it's exciting for us to be here. So obviously we're comparing how our investments are doing to that on the equity side of things, but I think it's a good thing for the listeners to hear. Here's a free deep thought at the beginning, but check your investments, see how you're doing against the S&P, how you're doing against bond benchmarks, and make sure that you're getting enough return to meet your goals.
I love it. Do you remember at the start of the year, you went around the table and you had everybody predict?
Yes.
Do you remember what mine was?
Was yours -4 or something like that?
I think it was 4.
Just 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Everybody was all over the place. I think that was early January. What do you think the S&P will do by the end of the year? So we're getting close. So we should have would put some money all in it. Like everybody should have added $1 or something. Whoever got closest, we'll see it. We'll come up with something fun for whoever's the closest. Yeah.
Well, just don't take stock market advice from me. Is basically the answer.
And look, you're the podcast host. Look how that works.
That's right.
You said your guess was 4. I think my guess was 24. So we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Guys were very optimistic.
We were so optimistic.
Of all the advisors there, I had the very lowest.
We felt very differently about our guesses all throughout the year. That's for sure.
That's true. For a while, I thought I was going to be the closest.
Mm-hmm. You were definitely.
I was waiting for the big prize. Okay, so today what we're going to do is talk about some pro tax tips.
Yes.
Some estate planning and legacy planning.
Yes.
Thought we'd start with tax tips, some pro hot take tax tips. Wow, I said that without stumbling. From Tim.
Yeah.
So,
you ready?
Yeah.
This is actually pretty interesting. Okay. So cryptocurrencies, and they're pretty complicated to wrap your head around, but a lot of people have participated in cryptocurrency investing. And I just want everybody to know that the wash sale does not apply to cryptocurrencies right now. So that could change in the future. But let's say that you're sitting on a $50,000 loss on your cryptocurrencies. You could sell it right now and buy it all right back, and that would actually technically harvest that loss. So if you did that with a stock or bond and you bought it right back or something similar within 30 days forward or behind it, it washes, it cancels out, okay? And the IRS created that wash sale rule because they didn't want investors creating kind of artificial losses. But right now, that rule does not apply to crypto. So this can be very helpful for our listeners or any of our clients that we're talking to that are sitting on some substantial gains. A lot of our clients have realized substantial gains this year as we've been rebalancing, and it's been a good year. And so if they have losses on their cryptocurrencies, they could help to reduce that capital gain and thus reduce their capital gain tax this year.
So how do our clients know? Like if I were to call my advisor, and say, hey, do I have gains in my GIA accounts?
Right. So right, exactly. So our clients could call us and we could tell them. They can log on. We use Fidelity Investments as our custodian. So they could log on to Fidelity Investments. They could see that either in their closed positions. When you log in, usually to your broker, it kind of defaults to your open positions, the current things you have. But there's usually a pretty easy way to navigate to closed positions that were sold this year. And you should be able to see if there are gains or losses, short-term or long-term on there. I think if you got an advisor like us to save yourself the time, just call the advisor and he or she will tell you. But the custodian can do it. The statements might reflect what you've had up to that point, your monthly statements, or you can look at those closed positions.
All right, got it. So I'm hands off. So I didn't ask that for our audience. I actually asked it for me.
Yeah, are you asking for a friend or?
No, I wasn't. But I'm so hands off that I don't look at monthly statements.
Right. So I wouldn't do it just for the sake of doing it. I mean, you can carry forward losses, but if you know you have gains that you've already realized and you know you have losses in your cryptocurrency account, it might be something to consider.
All right, beautiful.
Yeah.
Love it. That seems smart. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. I was excited to learn about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, your next hot take text tip.
Deep
with
tips.
Tim.
Yeah.
Your deep thought.
So that would be just don't let any free capital gains sit on the table. Okay. So, for example, if you're single and you're filing single on your taxes, if your income is below $44,625 this year, you could realize capital gains up to that amount. So let's say you made 30 grand, you could realize another 14,000 in capital gains and pay zero capital gains tax on that. You're at the 0% bracket. So if you're married filing jointly, it's 89,000 and change, $250. So again, like if you're married, let's say you guys earn 60 grand together, but you could realize up to $29,250 worth of gains, and you would pay at the zero capital gains tax bracket. So it's just kind of like, don't leave these capital gains on the table, because next year, by January 1st, that gap that you could have filled, you're not going to be able to go back in time and fill it.
Got it. Another smart one.
Yep. And so another way that you can also realize gains free is if you have, if your kids have investment accounts that are actually set up as custodial for minors accounts. So it's kind of nerdy. It's tax code. They're either called UTMAs or UGMAs.
I know what it is.
Yeah.
Usually you would quiz me on something like
Okay,
this.
let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Uniform Transfer to Minors Act.
Oh, come on now. There you go.
Uniform Gift to Minors
Dang.
Act.
Ladies,
Boom.
where's the clapping happening here? So
nobody was there.
crickets.
Sorry. I can't find
You're not sure which button. Just hit a button, see what happens. Crickets. So yeah. That's great. I'm glad that you know what the acronym stands for. But regardless, if you've got them and those accounts are sitting on gains, they get the first $2,500 for free. At least of long-term gains, I think of income as well. But if you're sitting on some long-term gains there, you could just realize up to $2,500 totally free. I believe the next $2,500 are actually taxed at the child's income tax bracket. So if your child's not working yet, then there's also some more there on the table. So probably good to double check with your advisor or your CPA on that, but that's another opportunity for realizing some gains for free.
Nice. Okay. So you have something else about estimated payments.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. And a lot of people, if you're an employee and you get a W-2 and you've got withholdings, hopefully you're keeping up with at least your, W-4 from the federal government in Georgia. We're in Georgia. We also have the G-4 about our withholdings for our state income tax. So you want to make sure that that's on target. If you are making income through other sources, let's say you get some 1099 income. Let's say you own a business, you're getting some pass-through income like through a K-1. You need to check with your accountant about making estimated payments, because now the penalty for not making your estimated payments on time is 8% interest.
Of the amount that you owed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm not sure exactly how that's spread out, if it's pro rata or whatever, but it's a much more substantial interest rate compared to much more substantial penalty than what it was in the past. So it's definitely worth double checking on that.
Yeah, that's not exciting, especially now that we all got excited about being able to put money in a 5% savings account.
Yeah.
And now you didn't make your
That's a really great point, because you're like, oh, I'll just wait and settle up on my tax return. And if I owe the government, I'll pay it then. I'm just going to sit it in the savings and make, savings interest rates maybe as much as 5%. But you're really losing money because you owe them 8%.
Yeah, that's great. Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. And then a new rule about IRA withdrawals.
Yeah. So there's kind of like in the industry, I think a lot of us have always wished that if you're on hard times, you have a financial hardship, that you should be able to take some money from your IRA before you're 59 and a half without paying a penalty. And that has not been the case. You have to do it for, there's a whole list of things. I don't want to lose you, but that hasn't been one of them. But now you can take kind of a quote unquote emergency withdrawal from your IRA up to $1,000, and you can get that penalty free. So you're not going to pay that 10% penalty on that $1,000.
Well, you can borrow money out of your 401k. I mean, it's not a good idea, but
yeah. So it depends on the plan, and some plans will allow you to borrow against the 401k.
So this would be sort of like doing that.
It kind of is like doing that, because you can't keep pulling that $1,000 a year out. You kind of had this one-time thing, but if you put the $1,000 back, then you have access to it later. So kind of like a loan. That's an interesting way to look at it. It's like kind of an interest-free loan. You got to sell it, so it's not in the account anymore.
Right.
So it's not earning income or the potential to grow. So, but at least you're not paying that penalty. And if you're on hard times, you're in between jobs, you're sick, you need a little cash to kind of make ends meet, and you've got an IRA, you can pull up to $1,000 as a kind of financial hardship emergency withdrawal with no 10% penalty.
All right. And I think a recent episode you and I did, we were talking about parents who care about their kids' debt problems.
Yeah.
And the numbers in credit card debt that are super, super high. I also read numbers of IRA and retirement plan withdrawals also through the roof right now.
Yep.
Penalty. People you got to think about this. No, not that they're not thinking about it. They're thinking about it. They think they're making a good decision because that's what they did.
Yeah.
They knew it was a bad decision. They wouldn't do it. Right.
Yeah.
But when you pull that money out, taxed at your income tax rate, state and federal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then 10% off of that. So you're looking probably most states
really
at
fast.
40%.
Yeah. And I get it too. Like if you're in between jobs, maybe you're not making as much income that year. So maybe your overall rate is lower, but if you're going to be at a high or average income tax rate, that starts to get really, really expensive.
They should poll people who do that. Like, they probably do it in their 30s, right? Or 40s or whatever. They should poll them at age 65 or 67 and see how they feel.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a good decision.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's important that people are aware of what they're sacrificing to get that money early.
Yeah. All right. So that was pro tax tips.
Yes.
Now we're going to move on to estate planning.
Let's do it.
Stick with us, people. This isn't going to be terrible.
Yeah. We're going to try to keep it simple and helpful and maybe some things you haven't thought about.
Yeah. Just a couple quick things.
Yep. So one of the first things to do is here at the end of the year, a lot of our clients are thinking about their estate plan. One of the things you want to be thinking about is the beneficiaries on your accounts. Okay. So let's talk about your IRAs. We were talking about the Roth IRAs and the traditional IRAs, rollover IRAs. You can designate a beneficiary on your IRA. We highly recommend that folks do designate beneficiaries on their IRAs. A lot of folks will designate their spouse or a family member. And one of the things that you'll have an option is when you designate a beneficiary, you can check this box and you kind of had to look at that word. You're like, that's not stripes, that's stirpes. So it's called per stirpes. Yeah. So it's a box. It means it's Latin for by branch or by bloodline. It's like, for example, on my IRAs, my wife's my beneficiary. And then I just check this box, per stirpes, by her name. So it's usually an option when you designate a beneficiary. It would follow her bloodline. If I outlived my wife and I hadn't updated my beneficiaries to my kids yet, it's going to follow her bloodline to our 3 children. It's going to designate those equally. It's going to keep kind of following that path. So that might be something really helpful. It's something every time that we have our meetings with our clients, our annual meetings, we're reviewing their beneficiary designations, making sure they're up to date, they're the right person. And we talk to them if they want to have that per stirpes box designated. Most of our clients do designate the per stirpes designation, but not everybody.
Is there a reason that you would intentionally not check the per stirpes box?
Yeah, I think so. If it's your wife, then that makes sense. But if you're designating people that maybe aren't relatives, you don't have to designate a relative for it. You could designate your trust or your estate. And so in that regard, you wouldn't check the per stirpes box. I don't recommend actually that you designate your estate or your trust as a beneficiary unless you've done that in partnership and in agreement with an estate attorney and your estate plan. Because really if your IRA goes to your estate and the estate ends up paying income tax on that distribution, let's say it came out of pre-tax funds, then that estate pays the income tax on it. If it's not quickly moved out of there to the heirs, the other beneficiaries of the estate, and it pays like the highest possible income tax. So
got it.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I hit you with that question.
That's okay.
Preparing you for it, but you did a good job. Okay. So property titles.
Yes. So this might not be something you're thinking about a whole lot, but all of your personal property, your house, your cars, any other kind of real estate, it's got a title with it, right? And maybe if you just bought that car, then it's just titled in your name. You might want to update the title to include someone else, say your spouse or significant other. And then you have that option of either joint with rights or survivorship or joint tenants in common. So real quick, the difference there, and the same with brokerage accounts, actually. So when we have taxable accounts that are joint accounts, it's either rights or survivorship or tenants in common when we're doing investing. So let's say you own a house with your wife and you've got joint rights or survivorship, then, the surviving owner, co-owner, spouse in this example, the passing ownership's going to transfer to the other joint. Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. So they just go back and forth from one joint to the other. If it's rights or survivorship, makes sense. Tenants in common, that's not going to be the case. So if it's owned joint, tenants in common, somebody passes away, their share is going to go to heirs and not necessarily the other owner. So there might be some reasons for that. So I think that's just a good thing to double check. Hey, do I want this just titled in my name, or do I want to have my spouse on it, for example? And when I add my spouse, do I want it with rights or survivorship, or do I want it with tenants in common?
Got it.
Just a good thing to double check.
Man, we just get smarter all the time.
I hope so.
All right. What's the last thing on estate planning?
I think it's just, and this is something I know you and Justin have talked about in the past, but it's so very important to have a will, power of attorney, and healthcare directive. I had lunch with my estate attorney this week, and she told me that in the past month, she's had 2 people that work at Walmart come and do estate plans with her. So I don't think, we both agree that you don't have to have substantial wealth. And I'm not saying all people that work at Walmart don't, but she was just saying they work at Walmart, they don't make a lot of income, they don't have a lot of net worth, but they still wanted that will, power of attorney, and healthcare directive. There's still assets that you want control over where they go, whether they're small, medium, or large. And that's the clearest way to designate it. Now, depending on what state you're listening to this podcast in, probate can be very different. In Georgia, it's surprisingly not that challenging. And so we recommend will, power of attorney, healthcare directive for just about everybody. There's some cases that we do trust. But what is interesting is that there's one thing I don't recommend when it comes to getting your will, power of attorney, and healthcare directive together. And do you know what that is, Reid? You want to hit that crickets button?
I do know. I know what this is. Oh, let's tell a story. Go. I know what this is. Go.
So what's happening? So what I don't recommend is I typically don't recommend people do it online. And like an estate attorney will say, because it may not be accurate or, complete or something like that. And that may or may not be true. But the reality is that a lot of times folks just won't get it done. They'll get it started. They want to save money. They do it online. But if you think about it, it's like, hey, hon, I know we've had a long day and, we could sit down and watch a TV show or play a game or go for a walk. But, let's sit in front of the computer and make decisions about what to do when we die.
Right.
Nobody's super excited about finishing that out. And a lot of times you get stuck because you think, I'm going to get this done and just click it. But you have to make a lot of decisions about executor, executress, successors, trustees with successors. If you have minor children, guardians with successors. So that's just a few things on the will you've got to decide, let alone where the money goes.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you go over to the healthcare directive, it's like, when do I pull the plug, and do I just stay on the feeding tube if I can breathe, or vice versa. So that one gets really tough. People get stuck and they go, I'll just do it later, and they don't finish it. And so if you really want to see it through to the end, I recommend you find a local estate attorney. Maybe they got some good Google reviews, or they're referred by some friends of yours, or maybe it's provided to you by your employer. But I would it's good to have that conversation and build that relationship with an attorney anyway.
Yeah, and you kind of want an estate attorney who's going to do this and perhaps nag you a little bit, because they're going to send you home a big questionnaire that you need to fill out anyway.
Exactly.
The same thing's going to happen.
And it's not as cheap as doing it online. No. So you've got a lot more skin in the game to pay that estate attorney, which is hopefully going to help you see it through to the end. So I highly recommend you if you can afford it, you do it with an individual. If you're highly disciplined and you can see it through to the end, then sure, do it online. But most of us are just not going to see it through online.
Okay, so Tim, would you consider me disciplined, or maybe a little less disciplined?
Well, I feel like if people know the Enneagram, aren't you a 7, right? Yeah, you're a 7 on the Enneagram. So I think your default, much like my wife, is let's have fun.
Yeah.
Let's have fun.
Definitely.
So like sitting down, like your wife, Christy, going, hey, babe, let's sit down and finish our estate plan online. I mean, you love your wife. You probably would succumb to her will, but it's going to be the last thing on your possible list, right?
Here's why I asked.
Okay.
You know that story about, let's just say there was a guy who became a member of LegalZoom or whatever the thing online. Yeah. And was like, because they'll do a free will for me. It's like, what, $25 a month?
Oh yeah, the subscription ones. Yep.
Month after month. That's when you just never get around to it. For like 2 years.
Yeah. Are you speaking from experience, or
then you just
speaking for a friend, Reid?
You just never did it.
You never did
canceled it.
Yeah. Oh gosh,
I did it.
That was you.
Yeah, was
okay. Yeah. So you paid them and you didn't even. Yeah. Stupid. And again, that's why I think just meet with an individual that holds your time accountable to the estate attorney we use. It's like, okay, here's the meeting to fill out all the forms. We're already going to schedule the execution meeting. You got to get these things done in between, and just Get her done.
Gosh, you aren't kidding. That's, I mean, and I am pretty disciplined about that kind of stuff, by the way. So, but geez, not on that one. Okay, let's go on. Talk a little bit about some legacy planning.
Yeah.
This is good.
I think so. Like you start reminiscing at the end of the year, you're around family and friends and the holidays, and you're getting close to the end of the year. And, there's a lot of, I guess, more things like with church and, faith and, all these things that kind of gets you really reflecting, And I think when we think about legacy, we think about generations and families and that time when you're maybe around your kids and your grandkids. And so if that's something that's thoughtful that you're thinking about is legacy planning, these would be those times of the year where you're thinking about what am I doing as far as passing down my legacy? Maybe I'm having conversations with my kids and my grandkids about what it means to be part of your family or lessons that you've learned and things that you want to pass down from generation to generation. When I think about legacy, I think about when I'm not here, what do I want my kids to remember about me? What impact do I want to leave on my community? The nonprofits that I work with, right? So you and I are really familiar with a DAF. What's a DAF stand for?
Donor Advised Fund.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Donor Advised Fund is really cool. I think of it like your own 501c3 that you set up. And when you put the money in the DAF, you get the deduction for when the money goes in, not when the money goes out of the DAF. And just as long as you give to some other 501c3, it can be transferred or granted.
Is that a Fidelity term or is that a industry term?
So DAF is an industry term. Okay. So Fidelity has their, it's called Fidelity Charitable.
Okay, got it. Right.
Yeah, Fidelity Charitable has the DAFs. And that's typically what we recommend for our clients because we already have their investment assets at Fidelity. And to be able to fund their DAF with their most appreciated securities is one of the easiest things. They make it so easy. It's super cool. What's great about a DAF too is that it does give you the ability to give anonymously. So if you just kind of want to give a one-time gift and you don't want to be called, emailed, text nowadays, getting snail mail forever, you can give anonymously because you don't need that deduction for the nonprofit that finally receives it. You're getting the deduction when you fund the DAF.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I know Justin has talked probably with you in the past about bunching strategies when people take the standard deduction, they're giving throughout the year doesn't exceed the standard deduction, so it doesn't necessarily increase their economic benefit. And so the idea of maybe funding a DAF for 2 years and then itemizing that year, and then in the other years that the DAF is giving, but you're not funding the DAF, you're taking that standard deduction. It's called batching. I don't want to lose anybody here, but the DAF's a really cool tool to be able to automate giving, systematize it, let your gifts grow until you give them, and maybe give anonymously.
Good. Good. Back when you were talking about just kind of legacy planning and stuff like that, I was thinking, you're like, oh, you spend time with your family and you think about all these things. You think about the people that spend time with their family and you're like, they're all out.
That's right. That gets you rethinking about your estate plan. I'm writing you out of the will. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully that's not what's happening.
Keep the peace, folks. Keep the peace.
Yeah. So the last thing I would say about legacy, and there's a lot we can talk about. Actually, I will share 2 things. One, a really easy thing to do is just to give books. Buy books that you've read that really impacted you. We've had Dale Alexander on here before who wrote the Talk About Money. That's a phenomenal one for anybody to read, but especially high school students, high school seniors.
16 to 24. I think is what it's targeted.
That's his range. That makes so much sense.
So good.
Dave Ramsey, as well as his daughter, have a lot of really great books out about money. So just if there's any books that you've read that have impacted you that you feel like, man, I would love for my kids and my grandkids to, kind of have this similar impact and help in their life, then I think buying some books for them. They may not read it right away, but they might hang on to it. You always hear these stories with Dave Ramsey's book, The Total Money Makeover, that somebody gave it to them and they didn't read it for a year or 2 later. Or a decade. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. And then the last thing I'll share, and this is just this is kind of nerdy. So full nerd alert here. I keep this thing. Is there a nerd button you're trying to look for? So where's the nerd button? Yeah. So I have this thing that I have called a legacy will.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were talking about a will for like an estate plan, but I have this thing called a legacy will, and it's really just an Apple Note on my phone. And I will add to it over time. So I will add quotes, either quotes I've heard around my family, maybe my mom or dad or grandparents had said. I put that in there. There might be some quotes that I like that I put in there. Proverbs I put in there. Actually, there's a couple family recipes that I like. I put those in there. My wife Maureen and I have a list of our Goodwin family classic movies,
Nice.
Some of our favorites. So just some really great life lessons. I have this intentional time with our kids almost once a week where we do family fun night, and we will share something from the legacy will. So I know it's super nerdy.
That is.
They kind of realize that they can't like get out of this family fun night until like, hey dad, what's in the legacy will? But my hope is that I'm, slowly sharing this with them as they're being raised, and eventually kind of have some hard copies of it that would be given to them, with the estate plan.
That's fun.
Yeah.
That's fun. That's very intentional. You, as I always say, are one of the most intentional people I know. So
that's fun.
That is great. So back to the books really quick. So we like Dale's book right now. That's probably hot on my list. You have a book.
Yes.
Exponential
Wealth. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How to create sustainable income for life. And so that one is really helping you think about planning for the end in mind. What's the end in mind? The end in mind is a peaceful and happy and meaningful retirement. I believe that environment is going to be more likely to be those things if you have diversified your income intentionally. And that's going to be really hard to do once you're already in your 60s, 70s, or 80s. But if you can start doing that in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, then you can get to the point where you've got stocks and bonds and real estate and maybe some other things that are diversifying your income stream, Social Security. And so there's a good bit in the book about that. We talk a lot about don't let interest go both ways. You got all this debt you're paying interest on, but that you're saving over here. And kind of like we were talking about before, saving that 5%. Yep. But, oh my gosh, I've got an 8% debt to the government. And so I'm actually losing money on this. So.
Good. And just finally, hot book right now that other than those two, which of course would be our two favorite, yours especially, but any other hot book that you're thinking?
Man, I will. This is the third time today I've talked about this book. So I will share this book. It's called Strength to Strength.
Ooh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I heard I listened to the Andy Stanley Leadership podcast, and he interviewed the author. He's I can't remember if it's Yale or Harvard. I'm sorry. I think he's he's a professor there. He wrote this book. He deals with this kind of imposter syndrome because apparently he didn't get his degree from like an Ivy League school. Like he got it online or like at some community school, which immediately made me like him even more. But he talks about some of us that are like in intelligence or knowledge work. We're not. We're working in front of a computer, or we're talking to people, or we're advising, right? Or we're a computer programmer or whatever, knowledge work. And after doing a couple decades of that, your brain starts to shift, and you really kind of have to think about moving more towards coaching, advising, teaching, mentoring to continue to find meaning and fulfillment in life. I think a lot of people misunderstand what they're feeling. They might sell their business or change careers or start, golfing and gardening full time, and it's just too soon. And really, it's not so much about completely changing everything about your career. It's more about maybe just adjusting some things and how you're looking at it. And it was just really, really powerful. So that'd be my hot tip. I was talking to a client recently, and I could tell that I don't think he loved his job anymore, but he was thinking, well, if I just stick with it a couple more years, then I can retire. And I'm like, we're not promised tomorrow. I don't think it's worth it to keep working a job you don't like. Why don't you read this book? So I sent it to him, and then we're kind of working on his financial plan. I'm hoping to be able to show him that hey, you can. He doesn't think he can make as much money if he leaves this job going somewhere else in the marketplace. I'm hopefully going to be able to show him with his plan that it's not as necessary for him to make as much money as he's making now. So you can pretty much always make the plan work. It's just what are you willing to give and take?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, thanks for being with us. And to get our end of your planning guide or any of our blogs, remember, listeners, you can text blog to 66866. That's how you do it. Those come out about twice a month. And if you want to reach us, you can do that through there. And, as financial advisors, when we talk about all these things, we manage and rebalance portfolios, but the unique value is that we work to understand our clients' individual goals so we can have these types of conversations, planning conversations, right? Because they're all personal and unique to each individual, just like you did with that client that you were talking about.
Absolutely.
Strength to strength. Tim, thanks for being with us again.
Yeah, always good to be with you.
Hey, and thank you for listening. We will catch you next time. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
The Money Pick podcast is hosted by Reid Trego, a financial advisor at Goodwin Investment Advisory. This podcast is intended to share information and perspectives, but should not be interpreted as legal, financial, or tax advice. The opinions shared by participants are not necessarily endorsed by the company. Goodwin Investment Advisory is regulated by the SEC, and the company operates in compliance with applicable securities laws and regulations.